Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the 8th Halifax International Security Forum in Nova Scotia, Canada, and we have with us Senator Chris Coons, who is the Democrat from the great state of Delaware. You're on the Foreign Relations Committee as well as on the Appropriations Committee. Very large congressional delegation here, sir, this year. You know, Senator John McCain, Neil Shaheen, Jean Shaheen, excuse me, and obviously there was also Tim Kaine, who won the Builder Award. Why was it so important for such a large, and Adam Kitzinger is here as well, some folks from the House. Why has this conference become such an important element on the annual congressional travel calendar?
Well, I came this year for the first time as part of the largest bipartisan delegation ever. First, to reassure our Canadian allies, to thank them for hosting this remarkable conference, and to have a chance in one place at one time to meet with over 800 people from more than 70 countries. Every single conversation, there's been some concern expressed about the outcome of the American presidential elections and the consequences we might see, whether it's for climate change, for our support of NATO, for our relationship with Russia, for our commitment to continuing to conduct a war against ISIS. Every single panel, there's been an expression of concern. So first, I came in order to reassure and thank our vital Canadian allies, but I think our large bipartisan delegation is here to also engage, to lean into some of these questions, to remind people that Congress continues to have an important, even a vital role in setting the agenda for American foreign policy, and to reassure people that we will not quickly or in a cavalier way allow President-elect Trump to turn away from decades-old commitments to vital allies and to important multilateral structures like NATO that have helped secure the peace for decades.
During even the span of this conference, we're now at the end of the second day. On the first day, a lot of the discussion was obviously the statements that candidate Trump made. President Obama and the president-elect had spoken, and the president was the one who spoke on behalf of Mr. Trump, saying, look, he understands the importance of NATO and the alliance and allies and allied relationships in America, abiding by its obligations. The President-elect hadn't said anything, but then there was the conversation which happened between the NATO Secretary General and Mr. Trump, where Rose Gottmuller today said, it was great that there was a commitment to NATO, but also a focus on increasing defense spending. From your standpoint, are you encouraged by this? Because there were a lot of folks over the course of this conference in a very bipartisan manner who have been expressing a little bit of concern. Has that been a settled issue in your mind at this point, given some of the statements you've heard?
Well, I don't think anything is a settled issue yet in terms of what President-elect Trump's foreign policy, security policy will be. Given the wide range of troubling or even outrageous things that he said as a candidate, I understand why there's widespread concern about what his policy path might be. But since he was elected, beginning with his victory speech on election night, he has said a whole series of things to walk back some of his more extreme campaign commitments and to reassure both Americans and our allies that he's not about to wipe away decades-old commitments. We don't yet have clarity about what he intends with regards to Russia. So I spent a very late night talking to a large group of folks here from Estonia, from Ukraine, from other allies that face Russian aggression fairly directly. And I think that is an important and an unsettled question where Congress will play a central role. But I do think over the course of the 2 days I've been here, the 2 days of this Halifax International Security Conference, we've seen the general temperature in the room come down and folks be reassured, both by conversations such as that with the NATO Secretary General and by things said by senators and congressmen, Republican and Democrat, in the different panels that we've had so far.
John McCain, unsurprisingly, was very, very passionate and very muscular about not having a link, for example, between Syria and between Ukraine. What are you, as a member of the Senate, looking for? Is it the new administration's view, for example, in sanctions extension over Ukraine? Obviously, the Obama administration has been pushing Europe very, very hard to have a continuation of sanctions and a continuation of U.S. sanctions. What are some of the canaries in that coal mine that you're going to be looking for, and your fellow members on both sides of the aisle that will be looking for?
There's a couple of issues that are particularly important to me that I don't know if they're broadly shared on a bipartisan basis. Whether we will continue to meet our commitments under the Paris Accords in terms of making progress against climate change, whether we'll continue to honor the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran. Neither of those were too directly addressed here. They were indirectly addressed on different panels. And I don't know that we have bipartisan agreement. My hope for those two is that we would proceed carefully. I'm thinking about what the consequences would be for our relationships with Europe and the rest of the world if President-elect Trump were to suddenly walk away from these commitments, as he put it on the campaign trail, tear up these deals. When it comes to the U.S.-Russia relationship, there was widely expressed concern here that Trump, who views himself as a master deal maker, as he said in the campaign, smarter than the generals, that he might try in one sort of master stroke to cut a deal that would recognize Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, that would recognize Russia's inappropriate intervention to prop up the murderous regime of Bashar al-Assad. And I think Senator McCain and others spoke very pointedly about how that would face united congressional opposition. There are some very complex realities on the ground in Syria. I don't think anyone has a clear or certain path and says this is a better way. But for President-elect Trump to abruptly pivot from what has been an American stance over decades of seeing first the Soviets and now the Russians as among our major adversaries in the world, I think would be hard for the average American to take, let alone the average hawk in Congress, let alone the average member of Congress. So I think of all the topics we've discussed, the one where Trump faces the greatest threat to his effectiveness and his credibility as our national leader would be if he were to make some really abrupt, big-scale change that literally abandoned our allies, those who we've supported in Ukraine and those who we've trained and equipped in Syria, and the concerns of our vital NATO and other allies in the Middle East who don't want us to recognize Assad.
But a president has enormous authority, and you can easily argue that President Obama's redefinition of executive powers is something that, President Trump is going to try to take advantage of. Is there a concern that it will not be as direct, but could happen in a lot of very small incremental steps? Some of my Republican strategist friends have said that's actually a bigger worry, that whether perniciously over a period of time there's that erosion. Is that a concern?
Yes, on a whole range of things, from civil liberties to our engagement with the world, from our budget priorities to our support for NATO. I think a more legitimate concern is that it won't happen in one bold stroke, so bold that it threatens significant opposition, but that these fundamental commitments will be gradually eroded in small ways over time.
Let me ask you two last quick questions. Question number one is, what are the things that you can actually see working with President Trump on? What are the things that you look forward to actually, and the Democratic caucus looks forward to working with him on to lead to the kind of bipartisanship progress everybody, I think, one of the messages from the American people was, hey, we want some performance from you guys. I
first came to the Senate 6 years ago. I ran a county government for 6 years before that. I was very optimistic that we were going to put a lot of resources into building infrastructure, to fixing and rebuilding our roads and bridges and our tunnels and our highways, which would both put a lot of people to work and strengthen our economy. Our competitors around the world have much more modern infrastructure than we do. Folks who go to China or South Korea will come back and say our airports and our highways and our rail feels third world compared to their state-of-the-art. And it's been, to me, a great frustration that over 6 years, where we had the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO jointly encouraging us to legislate, we haven't gotten there. This is one where I'm hopeful that President Trump will work with Democrats and Republicans and get something done that will put people to work and strengthen our economy.
Let me ask you one last question, and it's on climate change. You were on the climate panel. The president-elect has flat out repeated his assertion that climate change is not real, that it's a Chinese-inspired hoax. From your standpoint, as the President of the United States, he will have a lot of executive power in terms of how things are interpreted. There are a lot of members in the Republican caucus who do not believe that climate change is a significant risk, and if it is happening, is not man-made, and so are not as passionate or as motivated to do something about it as you are and some members of your caucus are. What's the way forward on climate? And are these years going to be pivotal years, given that the vast majority of climate scientists are saying that it's an issue? I mean, it was interesting here in almost every conversation I've had with Canadians, no matter what their stripe, military folks, given how much of the country is snow and ice, have told me, look, over my 40-year span of my career, the place just doesn't even look like what it used to. How do you think this issue is going to play out over the coming years?
Well, first, some hopeful input, if I could. Changes have already been made by state governments, by city governments, and by our private sector that will continue progress towards reducing America's emissions and deploying significant new amounts of renewables. Those will continue. Regardless of what the change in federal policy might be. Our military is already significantly planning for funding and preparing for the impact on our bases and facilities around the world, many of which are in low-lying coastal areas, and in beginning to deploy and develop new technologies simply because of the cost, the logistics, and the reliability, the ease of using alternative fuels or different power generation systems, whether in combat theaters or in bases around the world. So we will continue to make some progress. We will make less without decisive presidential leadership. It could lead to us being more isolated globally because there is a very strong global consensus that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and we need to take action to address it. That's what the Paris Climate Agreement signaled, was more than 190 countries coming together to sign that pact. We can't walk away from it quickly, but a President Trump, if he continues with his wrong-headed view that climate change is a Chinese hoax really could harm our international standing and really could slow our progress towards reducing America's carbon footprint. I think there's enormous opportunity for us, for American companies, for American inventors, and for the American economy in seizing this moment because the whole world needs cleaner energy production and distribution technologies. If we don't take this moment, the Chinese, the Germans, others will, and I think we will regret not having that leadership in the White House in the next couple of years.
Senator, thanks very much for being so generous with your time.
Sure. Thank you. Great to be with you.